feel like thank you. I think the teacher certification is going to take some time. And let me just pull up my agenda here. Hey, Amanda. Okay. So the meeting is open. Public comment period. If anyone would like to speak up, it doesn't appear that we have anyone from the public, but we'll give it a moment. And if anyone wants to chime in, by all means, just say something. And we can always go back because this is a little bit more casual. Eldred, did you get a chance to look at the minutes? I looked them over and they seem, you know, a recording of our recording.
I was fine with the minute.
Okay. All right. Hi, Emil. Oh, that was an arm. Okay, so I want to just dive right in, and I think that, so we're going to head into teacher certification, and that is the big topic we want to cover today with the folks that are here. And then I would love that if they could go and we then can talk about voting age, so we don't have to take up too much time. So between Gladira and Kate, I'm not sure which one of you want to start, and then we're gonna hand it over to Catherine because this is a big part of her work. So Gladira, I know you sent some stuff here. Kate, I know that you're on this on your level. Which one of you would like to start?
Well, Gladira and I connected on this, and I thought that all of, that the proposal that she put together made a lot of sense and had a lot of appeal. But I think it was great to, to loop in ITA, because I know that NICET's been working on this issue at the state level as well. So my thought was that maybe Gladira could just share out what her thoughts were in terms of a direction for advocacy, and then we could hear from the NICET folks in terms of the efforts that are being made at a state level and how we might support that.
Fantastic. Gladira, take it away, please.
Yes, good afternoon, good evening. So the proposal that I shared identifies the problem or the issue at hand of shortage of teachers in critical areas. And so the proposal is to allow teachers with certifications from outside of New York to teach in New York, allowing them a safeguard that would be subject to an APPR observation evaluation process by certified NICET administrators, and then subject to a longer probationary period that would allow for, so basically like a reciprocity, but the reciprocity that's outlined in NICET right now is really more of it's the same application process. So this proposal is allowing for a much quicker process to certification, and then also proposing a limited number of this type of pathway. So creating a new pathway that would then have an easier way for already certified teachers in other states to gain certification in New York State. Right now, as I mentioned, Erin, in an email to you, one of the things that is serving as a Band-Aid and allowing us to recruit teachers, retain them while they work on their certification is that MOA, the Memorandum of Agreement, that has created an additional salary grid line, or two additional salary grid lines that will allow for new teachers that we've hired. They're navigating the certification process. It will allow them to have a salary, be ITA members, receive benefits. And so that's serving right now as a great recruitment tool, retention tool, so that we don't have to immediately tell teachers, okay, you can only work as a per diem sub or an extended assignment sub and no benefits. And so are there any questions?
Gladira, you said something about a longer probationary period. Can you explain because I saw that you sent the PowerPoint, but then I couldn't open it. So I'm trying. So
Oh,
I'm
I'm sorry.
having any of the background.
Yeah, so in the proposal, a longer probationary period would allow for additional observations and also allow the educator to complete any courses that are, or any, course or professional development that is needed, that's deficient in the area. Let's say in their state, there's an area deficient and not equivalent to the New York State, then it would allow that time.
So I'm just trying to put all the pieces together. We're talking about teachers who have been certified, who are certified. So they're coming from, but just not certified in New York State.
Right.
Who, depending on where they come from, may or may not have had tenure in their former schools. We're hiring them on a longer probationary period than, we typically, if you already had tenure, hire them on a 3-year probationary period or a 4-year if you didn't. Is this like the probationary period could be extended if you haven't met all the requirements by the end of it, or is it an automatic longer probationary period?
You said it could, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Or is it automatically longer than the 3 or 4 years that anyone who was newly certified, who was a new hire but had a New York certification got?
Yeah, I think, well, that's a good question. The proposal in making it longer, it's really saying, okay, when the NICED is reviewing a person's certification and their qualifications and in saying, okay, is it comparable? Then having this longer probationary period would go in place of saying, okay, this person has demonstrated that they meet those requirements, so to say.
Gladira, let me ask it this way, because I think I hear what Catherine's saying. So a 5-year probationary proposal is saying that there's an assumption then that they would not even achieve an initial certification within those 5 years. So if somebody needed, 2-3 years to, let's say, meet any type of commissioner or board of regents newest kind of pathway, I think that's the issue to get around, is that would NICED allow for longer than a 5-year time window to make them meet the requirements under a pathway. So for some of the pathways right now, they usually figure out how to meet it within the end of their supplemental. So for example, we've got some New York State tenured teachers who were able to get the supplementals to fill some special ed, ENL, or early childhood certs. They usually only need like 2 to 3 courses of early childhood or ENL or something to meet the requirements, and then the content specialty test. And they can usually, depending on how fast they go on their own, they can usually get that done within 2 years. So that's the purpose of that. They don't need then a 5-year probationary period. They still only need the 3 because they will have had it by then while they're also doing the APPR. So back to, I think, the original question is that, is a longer probationary period even going to be anything that is even a talking point if a pathway says you still need to complete this within, let's say, 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, this, yeah, let me think about that, because it wouldn't be, okay, they would get their initial, or that it would take them 5 years. I see what you're saying.
You
So
can,
they would get, so instead of them getting, because right now there's a conditional, and then there's the emergency COVID gives them a year to then get the initial. This piece would essentially allow them to skip certain parts of the evaluation, but that's up for, that's a good question to modify this proposal.
Right. So remember, under New York State education law right now, tenure is different than certification. So you can be tenured after, let's say, your 4th year and still not obtain your professional. So if you don't get your professional, that's those wonderful meetings Bob and I have with people like, why didn't you get your professional? So tenure is a status under completion of a probationary period, which is not the same as your status of certification.
Yeah, and just thinking about as a recruitment tool, there's like a bit of leniency that seems like it should be helpful in recruiting, but to then automatically have a longer probationary period than anyone else who was certified in the state feels kind of a little bit like not necessarily a punishment, but like a negative consequence of being certified somewhere else and then having to do that. So it seems maybe if it were that the probationary period could be extended because of certification needs, so that it didn't like automatically end. But if someone achieves certification in the traditional probationary period that we offer to all of our new teachers, it doesn't seem like they should have to continue being probationary.
Catherine, I think it's a great point. I think what Ladera was strategizing around, and that's what we were, excited to have the opportunity to talk to you folks too, is the concept of there's always this resistance based on the state's priority of in-state training programs. So how can we sell this as, that it's not going to basically supplant New York State teaching programs, that there would be, I think what Ladera was thinking was there'd be then the additional, I don't want to say burden, but an additional step that would need to be completed so that there's still a disincentive to not be a New York State certified teacher that complete a New York State teacher program. Just thinking from the standpoint of the state's priority of prioritizing in-state teacher education programs. But I mean, that's why we're eager to also hear from you guys in terms of if there's initiatives that would be moving forward that have some traction that would not require those kinds of concessions. I think we would be totally in support of that too, and would want to definitely support that kind of initiative.
So is this a proposal that's coming through like NYSBA or something? Because like you said that, this would be a concession that we're trying to get to sell it. And I'm like, oh, well, who are we selling this to? Like, I'm unclear of the audience and actually I think because I couldn't open that PowerPoint, I'm missing the big picture of what is this proposal trying to do and who is the audience for it.
So NYSBA has a standing resolution that they adopt every year that basically says we're going to invest resources into lobbying the state to reduce the burdens on out-of-state teachers becoming certified. And they frankly don't really do much about it. It's a resolution that's passed, but there isn't really a lot of legislative activity behind it. The teacher certification requirements are, as you and Adam probably already know, they're not set by state law, so the legislature is not involved. It's set by the New York State Education Department. This group is a lobbying group, essentially. We work towards trying to advance initiatives in the New York State legislature with various agencies that will make the district more efficient and more successful in its mission. So I think we're at the early stages right now in terms of what audience, but sitting here today, I think that audience would have to be the New York State Education Department because it is a matter of regulation and not a matter of state law. And state law already provides for the lengthening of a probationary appointment. So like to your point, Catherine, if somebody did not achieve the required certification milestones, we could always use the dual procedure to extend a probationary period. That's already in place. And, Adam works those out with Bob all the time. So that's really already in place. What we were thinking was if there were to be a proposal presented to SED for relaxation, would they also be looking for something to then still continue to protect this, this priority of in-state training programs? And that's what we wanted to talk to you guys about, whether you're working on this too, or what thoughts you've had, where there's some motion, some movement and traction towards making some progress. And I don't think, Erin, you haven't spoken with anyone at NYSBA about this particular proposal, right?
Correct. Not yet. I just want to.
I think that might be the next step. That I think any proposal that we put forward, a big question is going to be: does this have the support of the local union? And does NICE agree as well that this is something that's worth working towards? So that was our thought in collaborating.
Okay. I mean, I think that so I haven't heard or seen a proposal similar to this coming from our end, coming from the teachers' end. We have a couple of different avenues that we're looking at to combat teacher shortage. I do think, though, that any piece of a proposal that would then set up a disparity, like an automatic longer probationary period for out-of-state certified teachers, would probably get pushback from the union because of the disparity it creates. So if you're in the drafting stages, I think that's where I think that idea of if it needs to be extended, yes, but to automatically say that it's an extended probationary period because you started in this circumstance, I feel like there would end up being resistance from teachers who would from the teachers union would start fighting that because of the disparity alone.
What do you guys have any ideas for strategies that the statewide union thinks might be successful towards making SED relax its out-of-state certification requirements?
So I can speak on some past stories because I help people with this who kind of get in this situation. So, and I'm sharing these stories with you thinking that maybe it'll help think ahead. So it's these kind of horrible stories about how somebody has an out-of-state graduate degree. And they, with all the online stuff now, they're becoming more popular. But even if it wasn't an online program and they did it in another state, they send their transcript to SCD, the Office of Teaching Initiatives, and we're waiting and waiting and waiting. And then the certificate, not even sometimes the initial, but the professional, it gets denied. And so after getting certification people in there to investigate, talking with a reviewer, there's been situations where I'll use a psychologist, for example. A psychologist was denied her professional cert because the transcript 3-letter code in front of a graduate course was EDU instead of PSY or vice versa, whatever. And it was a dual enrollment course. So we had to go back to the university, get a letter from the dean stating that it was a dual enrollment course. You could take it as a psych course or you could take it as an education course in order for SED to say that it was equivalent. We are doing that a lot with some of our ENL certifications. So I actually just sat with somebody at the end of last week who's trying to get their professional in ENL, and their background is in linguistics, but not necessarily education. So therefore, SED, Office of Teaching Initiatives, is going with a fine-tooth comb through these codes in front of the graduate course. And we have to the people have to go back and prove that it meets the same requirement. So these are the things that kind of get held up. And I know that we scream about these things all the time to the commissioner. Thank goodness we have a commissioner who's actually listening and from an education background, long history of it. And I know that our NYSET Vice President Julian DeBrango sits with her daily. She was actually just at the convention President's Conference that I was at last Thursday. We sat with Commissioner Rosa and Deputy and for a couple hours, and we went through everything from standardized testing issues to the certification and the shortage. So we do have somebody who's listening now, as opposed to some previous commissioners, which is a good thing. But of course, that's just the commissioner level. We've got the Board of Regents, who obviously needs to agree and vote on stuff. So that's my segue into EdTPA. So EdTPA has been this horrible, horrible experience for even a lot of in-state undergraduate program students, but at least they've had the buildup and background in, SUNY Portland, SUNY Potsdam, wherever you go. They have built up a system to kind of help people through that. And then even supervising teachers were there to kind of learn through that process with the supervisor. And we got a lot of our undergrad program people through it the last many years. However, if you came in from out of state, you were told to go back and take undergrad classes. You were told to go and do the EdTPA. So I'm going back even before COVID, we had people who were not being given the initial, all because of EdTPA. So they had to spend an entire year trying to do this EdTPA, even though they had a master's degree and taught in Utah for 19 years. Were having to jump through the hoops of the EdTPA while they were also, not getting support. So we were connecting people to other people informally as to like, hey, so-and-so had to do their EdTPA and they're, at 50 years old. There's like maybe a group peer network out there, but there wasn't like an education industry system to kind of help them through it because they weren't in a grad program or undergrad program. The good news is that I think at the next, with a lot of advocacy, NICED in there, doing resolutions, speaking directly with the Board of Regents, they sit right in the room with them. It does appear that they are going to act at the next meeting to not continue EdTPA. So the email I got from NICED office the other day was, quote, "We expect that the EdTPA issue to be voted on at the Monday's Board of Regents meeting. NICED will put out a field notice in the next leader briefing." So I'm waiting for that to kind of come through, but the hopes is that they will not make the EdTPA requirements anymore, which will help the out-of-state people, especially if they were, not coming from an undergrad program, and that will be one less barrier that they'll have to accomplish.
Adam, this is Eldridge. Can you help us by explain the acronym EdTPA? I'm not familiar with that. What does that
So it's
stand for?
this, I actually don't even know. It's just become this
I can tell you
acronym.
about it because I can
Yeah,
I've supervised a
Yeah,
number
go
of
ahead,
students.
Catherine. Yeah, it's kind of you no longer have to do the video. Algie, you might remember from back in the 90s into the 2000s, people had to submit like videos and stuff. That went away, and then they went to this thing called an EdTPA.
Yeah, so the
I do remember the videos, unfortunately. Yes.
so the EdTPA, I don't even know what it stands for. It's like teaching practice. I don't know what the A is for, but it's basically that to apply for initial certification, student teachers needed to submit an extensive portfolio that is basically like kind of like portfolioing every single day of their student teaching placement with like multi-page lesson plans and like 3-page reflections for every lesson that they taught. There's like a series of other, like there were a couple essays in the whole thing. And basically it required students, while doing the work of teaching and doing all of the work of learning teaching, to also go through a really intense, repetitive documentation process of basically every moment of what they were doing. And it needed to be done without any input from the cooperating teacher. So cooperating teachers were not allowed to actually help anybody with it. There we go, the teacher performance assessment. Thank you, Mary. So cooperating teachers weren't really even allowed to help with it. So it became, student teaching is still doing the full-time work of student teaching. And then students would have to go home that night and do 7 or 8 hours of documentation and reflection on the day that they just had while preparing for the next day, coming in and doing that. So it was really, it did a nicer job than those videos, because I remember the kind of joke that those videos were, but it just swung so far in the other direction that it became a very burdensome, very expensive process. And a lot of the ways that because no one could advise a candidate while they were doing their EdTPA, what a lot of the schools did to support them, because Adam was talking about undergrads being supported by their programs. I know my partner did his teaching certification through SUNY Cortland while EdTPA was a thing. And he had one semester where they did a practice ed TPA so that their advisors could teach them how to do the ed TPA, and did the whole thing once just for practice to learn the process. So the next semester they could do the whole thing all over again without the input. So, you know, to take that really burdensome portfolio process and do it twice was the way that people were being prepared for it. So we're very, very happy to see it go, because it was really a lot of unnecessary paperwork and not the right way to ensure that our pre-service teachers are, you know, learning the field.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And thanks for looking it up. Mary, was it you who looked that up? Good looking. All right. So I am trying to get to a direction here so we can keep going with the meeting. We know these things are complicated and take years. So do I understand correctly that hypothetically our local union would support this if it's done right, but has no official proposal out because you are relying on the statewide teachers union to communicate with whoever needs to be communicated with in Albany to make a change come about? Is that a correct reading of this?
I think it's more complicated than that. So, you know, the reason why there's NYSED attorneys and why there's attorneys with law firms throughout the state is that what Bob and I are stuck with right now, Aldred, is like right now, I know Karen Barden is like trying to deal with coding and paperwork. I'm sure the business office is trying to figure out what's going on too, because the MOA is helping get people into teacher positions and even get them some level of teacher pay, teacher benefits within the ITA contract, particularly the substitutes that are serving in it who aren't certified. The problem with it is that they're not certified. So under education law right now, they're not really LTSs because they're not in for anybody. In most of these cases, they're in for vacancies. So they're not officially LTSs, and they're not technically eligible for a probationary appointment. So technically it sunsets on June 30th. And the treatment right now is that they are, you know, either needing to get certification, which then we can retro date them as a dreamer credit type of concept, or they're done, just like anybody else who failed to obtain certification. So I'm thinking that more of what needs to happen is the concept of people getting some type of certification. It's not the like, well, they have this thing over there, so maybe that'll work. Or can we just like call this, or can a local do an MOA? So the emergency COVID thing, believe it or not, is actually still kind of controversial with some people. So the commissioner and board of regents, you know, voted on a COVID, I want to say waiver, but just with the inability to complete student teaching during the pandemic, inability to take some tests, they issued emergency COVID certifications. So we have people who, you know, are acting under that. That's going to expire. So they potentially would, you know, lose their positions if they don't obtain what they need to complete to get the initial during the COVID time period. So it's almost like you need something more like the COVID cert, but something that gives them an easier, quick way to say, I was certified in Pennsylvania, I've taught there for 19 years, and I need this few years of a quick type of turnaround so that I can become certified in some way. I don't know what the name of it's going to be, because that's what's going to allow for us to point to, you know, just like NYSBA does, just like NYSED does, you need things to point to because everyone loves to litigate everything, right? And so there needs to be something to point to say, this is how they're in this position. You know, that's where Bob and I haven't even gotten to yet, when we need to get somewhere by the end of this month as to what's happening with people in their certs. Right now, they need to come to an end unless there is some type of continued MOA. And then, you know, I'm not sure where it would go in terms of them having a probationary appointment, because some of the level C people who Karen is processing now didn't qualify for level A or B because they are not actively looking to obtain a degree in education or actively looking to obtain a certification. So the level C was added because most of the teaching assistants and substitutes that we had in these vacancies were not people who qualified for level A or B, improving that they were working towards a cert. So Karen's moving more people over under level C on probably on the next board report than she moved over to level A and B, as Karen and I meet every Wednesday to look at all of this stuff. So that's just a little factoid for you, is that, the number of people being moved over are the people who are not actively working on anything. And right now they will have to come to an end at the end of June.
I know also that locally, for some of the requirements that are put out for certification that require any sort of like supervised student contact hours. So whether it's like the state that you were certified in only required 50 practicum hours and student teaching, but New York requires 100 hours. So you can't get certified without an extra 50 practicum hours, even though you've been teaching for 10 years over here. Or teaching assistants who have been piecing together coursework, they have a bachelor's degree, they have all the coursework, they've been working with kids in the schools for 15 years, but it wasn't in a formal student teaching program. Those types of situations can be really difficult because none of our local institutions will just sponsor a student teacher. They make you go through the entire program. So it's like doing coursework that you like become part of that cohort program at SUNY Cortland or at Ithaca College. And because there's no like quick pathway to say, oh, you've been working with kids for years and you've been in schools, you understand how schools work, which is kind of ultimately the job of student teaching and practicum hours. Like, not having some of those pathways and then only having institutions that require you be enrolled in a degree program to be able to meet those pieces of requirements also is a barrier for many people. So I know that some of the initiatives that NICED is working on to look at the teacher shortage is on creating more clear pathways for people who fall into those situations and encouraging districts and their community, like community colleges, SUNY colleges, those institutions to partner up to be able to help work on creating some of those pathways that will work in their community. So while it's not necessarily the legislative piece, because I know that we have a lot of crossover between, people who make decisions in our institution and people who can help influence decisions in some of our higher ed institutions in the community, that's also a thing to keep in mind when looking big picture at how to get teachers moving forward with teacher certification, moving forward for educators who may not fit the traditional model.
So Catherine, when you say that, I want to kind of not pause for a second, but just add in a couple things. One, Mary, I see you, and I think like perhaps I wish that maybe Jen Gondak was here. Kate, I think we discussed this at one point where I can't remember because it's all jumbled, but it's not just a teaching shortage we have, right? We are short on speech therapists and occupational therapists and aides and physical therapists, and I mean, you name it. So as we're doing this work and having these conversations, I think that I want us to keep in our minds, how can we advocate also for the certifications for those other people? Because there are those people here from other states, Ithaca's transient, that we could probably not have such a hard time finding staff had we not have the stringentness. And while we're on that point, I want to also just kind of, if we could take a second, I want to take it back. And those of you who have expertise on this, I mean, what are the big differences between New York State, our certification? Why is it so hard here? Is there a reason NICED does it the way it does? And can you compare it to some other states and perhaps use some of their strategies as we are looking to get NISBA on board? I'm trying to think of ways to say, like, I want to know why we make it so hard for ourselves here if it works for other states.
I can share a little bit about what I know Jolene DeBrango has said directly to the Board of Regents and SCD. She has, over the past 2 years, has sat with them and have said, it's as if you don't want people to be certified in New York State, because she shares all of the individual examples. I shared a few of them with the reviewing of graduate transcripts or the EdTPA, and so hopefully with some more advocacy and voice that they will allow a teacher with 19 years in Pennsylvania to just get something a lot quicker without having to go through the long review. Like, I know that we want the reviewers to take these things as quickly as possible, especially in those situations. They should not be waiting 6 months to get a review when they have a valid state certification other than New York. So that'd be one thing, is how do we get them immediately reviewed? Gladira did this for years and Karen's doing it now as well. The expedited review process, there's certain rules around when you can put in for an expedited review. Like, it has to sit there for so long and then you can put in the expedited review. So those are the types of things that I kind of wish would go away. And I know NICET's legislative office is in there speaking on these things with OTI. To Aaron, to answer your question about some of the other states, I'm not an expert on the other states. I know, for example, Pennsylvania and some other states, they do the praxis, where New York State has had their own, whether it's the liberal arts test and then the applied teaching test and then the content specialty. And that's just what sometimes people have to go through, is sometimes 2 tests just to qualify for the initial, and then have to do a third. For example, if a teacher gets a supplemental to do early childhood, because we don't have a lot of the early childhood certs, we have a lot of the 1-6 certs, they're forced to go back and do the courses and then take another content specialty test in order to get the professional in early childhood to be able to stay a kindergarten teacher. So I don't know if that answers your question, but in terms of getting it quicker and having some type of cert to then allow people the time to do courses through the Education Learning Trust, get their other workshops done, is what I'm feeling is needed the most.
That idea about expanding where you can get those courses fulfilled. Like you mentioned the Education Learning Trust, which is NICET's professional development arm, but those are professional development courses that are not attached to a particular university, to a particular degree program, but still meet the same requirements and are still robust professional development. So thinking back to that idea of having to be matriculated in a degree program by a certain university, like those can be barriers when the same exact courses are available in other places. So widening, nobody wants us to say like, whatever, if they were certified over there, they should just be certified over here. Like there needs to be some kind of system of accountability, but ours in New York it is as if New York does not want teachers to become certified in New York.
Now, what do you, Catherine and Adam, what do you think would be a good trade-off? So that's what I was thinking in terms of, okay, longer probationary, let's say we have a teacher from Maryland has been teaching, went through a teacher prep program, teaching for years, awesome teacher, have them come here and we say, okay, well, we're comparing your teacher prep program from Maryland to teacher prep in New York, and you're missing these courses. You need to now, you've been teaching for 10 years, awesome teacher, but we can't certify you until you take, 12 more credits. So what would be a good trade-off, you think, in a proposal? Instead of a longer probation, we're giving them certification, but what would be a better trade, or another option of saying, give them certification, and there's this they do additional that other teachers that went through a New York State and is seen as you know,
Why did they have to do anything additional to what a New York State certified teacher would do?
I wish they didn't.
Yeah,
But
why are we creating a proposal that, like, why would you put forth a proposal that says more? They, like, if you do the New York State coursework to be certified in New York State and you meet all the New York State certification requirements, it shouldn't be up to people proposing to say, like, treat these people like you would treat any other person who did this here. Like, why do we need to add and ding them in this way just because they didn't? Like, I don't know that you
Yeah.
need that trade-off.
no, I'm
there.
just wondering because there's, you know, it's like, yeah, what would, instead of having a teacher that's a veteran in another state and has been certified and gone through their program, but it's not comparable to New York, then instead of we saying, okay, well, we can't hire you as a certified teacher until you do, you know, until you meet the requirements, then
Are you asking for permission to hire them in a probationary position until they meet the requirements? Like, is that all you're asking for? And not have to hire them as LTS?
well, if we're recruiting, let's say a hard to fill area,
Mhm.
and you know, we're recruiting a hard to fill area, and there's like, okay, there's an awesome teacher there, for whatever reason they're coming to Ithaca, and you know, they went through a great program in their state, but now we're saying New York State has evaluated and says, okay, it's missing this, but this is a veteran teacher. What would be, you know, I'm just brainstorming. I'm not really, you know, not asking, just brainstorming.
So Gladys, here, I think I hear what you're saying. So let me put it this way, maybe it's a different way of thinking about it. Right now, I don't believe, unless somebody tells me otherwise, I don't think all states have to have a master's degree. So if coming to New York State, the requirement is you have to have a master's degree to get your, let's say, professional, to allow a certification that gives them the equivalent of an initial so that they can get their master's. Where right now they're struggling to get their initial or even the conditional because of the way that they didn't even meet some of the like undergrad requirements. So what I would like to see is the ability to say, okay, you hold a certification in Georgia, you do not have a master's degree, but we're going to give you some type of equivalent, again, make up the name of the initial that allows for you to get your master's degree and complete what New York State Board of Regents wants in terms of the profession, which is the content specialty test, the DASA workshop, the child abuse, all these other things. Right now, people are struggling to get the conditional or the initial until they do several of those. So the speedier we can get the equivalent of an initial for those who have met their own state requirements is what I think is going to help people get something quicker and then allow a school district or BOCES to hire the person in a probationary status. Therefore, then, if they fail to complete the requirements within that time period, then what kicks in is just like what happens now is that they can be let go, right, for failure to obtain certification. But with the support in the time frame, it should allow them to get the cert. So when we sit with our colleagues who say, I have a Georgia cert, but I don't want to go back to undergrad classes, I hear them. Why would you want to go back and do an undergrad class when you could start on your grad work? So waive any undergrad requirement. If you have a certificate through a bachelor's degree program in another state, get them some type of thing with a length of time. And then just to follow up, for years and years and years, you were not even allowed to be a full year long-term sub unless you had certification in that particular area. And then a few years ago, we kind of started saying, well, as long as they're certified in something, let's get them into that position. But we really were saying, there's got to be a retiree or somebody certified in that area. The last 2 years under this MOA, we're not even looking for those certs. We're just saying, like, are you able to do this? And now do you qualify into one of these levels? And the last thing I'll say in terms of, the MOA is that at one point, I wrote a level D. So I wrote the A, I wrote the B, we got that signed back in the fall. And then I wrote the C, got that signed. There's a draft with level D. And here's the problem with the level D. And I'm looking at a screen of professionals, a lot, people with certifications and master's degrees. The problem with the level D was that it lowered the professional bar so low that it started to become questionable as to what we're actually doing. We don't see this happening in the law field or the medical field or the financial field. You have to obtain certain levels of education and passing of exams. So a level D saying that you need only the equivalent of an associate's degree or 60 college credits with no other training starts to become, questionable as to what we're even saying is eligible to be teaching our students. We need everyone to be in substitute positions. We need great SRPs. But that's one dilemma I know that I dealt with. I talked to Bob about that. We looked at each other and were like, oh, do we even go to a level D? I talked to Carlo, the president of the ESP union, who, they have to have correct me if I'm wrong, Ladira, they have to have a certain number of education credits and then pass the TA certificate. The level D was actually lowering the bar to be a teacher than those who were eligible to be a TA. And so we didn't go there, but there is a group of people right now in our teacher positions that don't qualify for level C because they don't have a bachelor's degree.
Adam, I do like the idea of, rather than creating a different system, just creating an on-ramp to the system that already exists. And I think that would be, Gladira, the simplest way to do it, like that they can start with that initial, because then it starts a clock, it gives all the parameters, it gives all the criteria, and it doesn't make the state try to organize some separate system that will inevitably become a paperwork nightmare and really difficult to navigate. And also, Adam, that idea about the level D, I completely agree with you. And I think that since NICET is working on career ladders for paraprofessionals into teaching certification areas, that if we have people who would be great educators, just not necessarily in the role of teacher yet because they haven't gotten there yet, to be able to, long term, if we had a good, strong career ladder and could look at a student and say, or not a student, look at someone and say, we can hire you as a teaching assistant now, but we can also help get you to teacher certification through these steps. Like there is some movement like that NICET is advocating for that would create some career ladders to make it a little easier to go from one to the other.
Yeah, and just really quick about what Catherine just said. So, I'm on the board for NICET, and so, we looked at an analysis of, where people would fall in terms of then being eligible, for a certification. For those who might have between an associate's degree and bachelor's degree, you're looking at maybe 2 years, and then we might see them being eligible. But for all the work that's being done, across the states this past year and in the future, you're really looking at, 4 to 6 years out before the first wave would actually, be eligible. Back before COVID, more than a third of active teachers were eligible for retirement by the end of 2025. We know that the COVID and the return after COVID, it drove out, I believe, more than they anticipated. So, we lost more people in that anticipated shortage as it is, on top of the people who've left the field. So, looking at a 4 to 6 year window out with any type of initiatives that Catherine's speaking about, it's a ways away. And so I too am thinking, with Gladira, like, that's not who the primary focus is for fall of 22. The primary focuses are these teachers who happen to be in the area, in the state, with a Georgia cert or a Utah cert, and are just fighting with OTI.
In some ways, legislative action, which is the group we're sitting here with here today, is the 5 to 10 year fight, whereas like HR is the tomorrow to 3-year fight. So I think it's worth having both conversations.
And I have to say, I feel like I would like to continue to invite Catherine and Adam to these meetings when we are talking about this. I think it's important to get that information, because my head is just absorbing everything. But of course, I'm not in the profession, you all are. I don't even know how to move forward with this right now. I mean, Gladira and Kate, after this conversation, where do you think we're at with what to do next?
I think a next thought might be to actually, and I defer to Dr. Brown about this if he thinks it's a good idea as well, but my thought would actually be maybe inviting this crew together again, along with adding Susan Mittler to the equation, just because she's a regent. She represents this region on the Board of Regents, and I know that opening teacher certification pathways is something she's very passionate about. And, I personally have spoken to her at length about that subject. She has lots of strong feelings about it. So I think inviting her to a meeting and just saying, what do you think? Where could we be helpful? Because I think part of our issue here, Erin, is we're not, it's difficult for this committee to find a way to tackle this issue. It's just a huge issue. It's one that NYSET's not been successful in moving, NYSBA's not been successful. So we don't want to continue to just take efforts, from you and Eldred, who are volunteering your time, that are not going to be productive. I think that talking to Susan about where do you see some advocacy could be helpful. Is there something that we could present, or an interest group we could present to, that might be helpful? That's what I think would be a next, a good move for next steps. What do you guys think, Catherine and Adam? Do you think that would be helpful? Would you enjoy being part of a conversation like that?
Well, I will say, before Catherine and Adam speak, I have spoken to Susan about this several times. And there were times in the past where she's intimated that there were personnel roadblocks, people in positions who were not attenuated to this need. Now she tells me that there are different people in different legal and different decision-making positions who are amenable to this. So I think having her come and participate in these conversations would be a good thing. Here is what I think will not be productive. Us having a open-ended conversation like this one, without some parameters specifically focused on the 3 steps we need to move forward. This group, Legislative Advocacy, has conquered all of these complicated atmospheric things in the past. Don't get me wrong. I know I can sense the complexity. I live in this complexity, but we pushed through and we've gotten laws passed that benefited the entire state. What I'm not used to and won't subject myself to is sitting behind somebody else's built up wall where it looks like there's nothing that can be done. We know there are things that can be done. We know we have a team here that can get them done. So if we're going to have this conversation, what I would like to ask people to think about is to create a venue in which we have marching orders, which we have 1, 2, 3 steps that are doable, which won't squander people's valuable resources, and that move the chains. I don't mind if it takes 2 years. I just need to see that we're moving the chain.
Eldred, I agree with you. I think that with this case, though, there is a lot of groundwork to lay, and I think a deeper understanding is necessary. And I also think it is important, and Mary, I would like your opinion on this. I really do think we need to include Jen. If we're going to put this effort in, I would like to know about not just teachers, but other educators. I don't know if we should do that in a separate conversation. It sounds, if we have the next meeting, that's going to take a lot of time. So
So Erin,
actually
just really quick to throw in, the occupational therapists are really the only field that you mentioned that is a little different, because theirs is more like a health license. But speech pathologists, social workers, psychologists, they fall under the student service or pupil personnel category, which is still very similar. So, OTs are more under like not civil service, but yeah, more like a civil service type of thing. But right, and they're in the ITA bargaining units for representation. But the other fields you talk about, they're not actually different. So special ed, social work, psychologists, speech counselors, those still fall under a lot of this same stuff. They still have to meet a certain requirement. They have a little bit of differences under the APPR and under, but not much. So in terms of you thinking that there's a lot of isolated umbrellas, there's really not, other than OT. So it is kind of all under the same.
That's good to know. Sorry, go ahead.
Erin, to answer your question, because I have family in from out of town, so I do have to leave at 6. To answer the question, Kate suggested that this group of people here, well, your committee, Adam and I invited to it, invite Regent Mittler to have a conversation about what are the entry points and kind of get her involved in the strategizing of how to move forward on an issue of how to reduce the barriers to entry for teacher certification for these specific situations. I am happy to be part of that conversation. I think from that conversation will come a clearer view of the action items that Eldred is speaking to, because I too, I'm a very busy person. I can't sit through a bunch of meetings that don't lead to actual action items. But I do think in this particular case, because like NICET, the work that I do with NICET is with our legislators, and our legislators don't move the chain on this issue. Regents, SED, having that perspective here will be valuable to figure out what is the path forward. And I think it is long-term. I don't think it's an immediate thing. So I think that there's also the element of HR needing to figure out the immediate stuff, which you've been doing with the MOA and all that kind of stuff. But I'm happy to be part of that conversation.
So next, we have to go because we have the board meeting now. I will send an email agenda setting for the next one, which is the second Tuesday of May. And yeah, I want to keep this fire burning and move forward. And I think the next meeting will be the agenda setting.
I'll just
So
give a quick update, Erin, before we leave.
yeah,
about
please, the voting age.
About the voting. Okay, so multiple parties, lots of moving parts. We may be a little delayed this week because the kids are off doing fun kid stuff with their family. Ava's in Florida. I can't remember where Fatu is, but somewhere else not here. However, I'm trying to get the parties together, and hopefully we could have a conference call even this week while folks are away. Anna Kellis has given us some dates. I've reviewed the legislation. Kate, it seems pretty straightforward, and we definitely want to slow this process down enough to have our students who propose it participate. So that's where we are. Hopefully by the end of this week, early next week, I'll have an update on the actual meeting time.
Thank you, Eldred. And thank you for squeezing that in. And thank you everyone for taking time out to be here today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.